In a rare and powerful moment of unity, the highest court in the land came together in a way that few could have predicted. The Supreme Court delivered a unanimous verdict that sent shockwaves across the nation, capturing the attention of lawmakers, legal scholars, and everyday citizens alike. On November 21, 2025, all 9 justices, regardless of their ideological differences, joined forces to strike down the long-standing federal prohibition on short-barreled rifles. This landmark decision fundamentally altered the landscape of U.S. weapon regulation, marking a turning point in the nation's approach to gun laws. This was not a narrow or technical ruling. Instead, it was a sweeping and emphatic statement about the enduring reach of the Second Amendment in modern America, reaffirming the constitutional right to bear arms in a way that few had anticipated. For nearly a century, simply owning a short-barreled rifle without federal registration was considered a serious felony, carrying harsh penalties and lifelong consequences. But with the stroke of a pen, that reality changed overnight, erasing decades of legal precedent and enforcement. The court's opinion was clear. The government had failed to demonstrate that these firearms were uniquely dangerous or deserving of special restrictions. In a decisive move, the justices surgically removed one of the oldest and most controversial federal firearm regulations from the books. The fact that the decision was unanimous gave it extraordinary weight and legitimacy, sending a powerful signal to lower courts and lawmakers. It established a new baseline for how gun regulations will be evaluated in the future. Unlike previous Supreme Court rulings on firearms, which were often deeply divided and contentious, this rare consensus challenges the very foundation of many existing and proposed weapon laws, forcing a nationwide re-examination of gun policy. The echoes of this historic decision will reverberate through the halls of Congress, state legislatures, and American society for generations to come, shaping the national conversation on firearms, rights, and public safety in profound and lasting ways. The Supreme Court's decision in United States v. Miller, too, was clear and consequential. The justices agreed that SBRs are not fundamentally different from common rifles owned for lawful purposes, dismantling nearly a century of federal policy. The ruling relied on the Bruin framework, requiring firearm regulations to align with historical tradition, something the government failed to prove for SBRs. The 9-0 vote signals a cross-ideological consensus. The Second Amendment limits the government's ability to ban entire classes of arms in common use. The court acted as a true neutral arbiter, applying constitutional principles above politics. Before Miller II, SBRs were regulated by a strict federal process: fingerprints, background checks, a $200 tax, and long wait times. States layered their own laws on top, with some banning SBRs outright, and others deferring to federal rules, creating a confusing legal map. The $200 tax, once a major barrier, symbolized the government's intent to discourage ownership. The law grouped SBRs with machine guns, a classification the Supreme Court has now rejected. ATF's shifting rules on stabilizing braces only added to the chaos, highlighting the arbitrary nature of the law. This confusion set the stage for the court's decisive intervention. The story of United States v. Miller II began in the quiet, remote stretches of rural Idaho, where David Miller, a local resident and firearms enthusiast, was arrested by law enforcement. His alleged crime? Possessing an unregistered short-barreled rifle, or SBR, which he had carefully built himself in his own workshop. The arrest sent shockwaves through the small community, raising questions about federal gun laws and individual rights in America's heartland. Miller's legal team quickly mobilized, drawing on the historic 1939 Supreme Court case, United States v. Miller, as a foundation for their defense. They argued that, unlike in the past, modern SBRs are now widely owned and commonly used for lawful purposes such as home defense, sport shooting, and hunting. Their strategy was to show that these firearms are not unusual or especially dangerous, but rather a normal part of American gun culture. After a series of setbacks and losses in the lower courts, Miller's case was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. There, it was consolidated with several other high-profile challenges to the ATF's controversial 2023 rule on stabilizing braces. which had sparked nationwide debate and protests among gun owners and advocacy groups. The government's justification for the ban on SBRs and stabilizing braces appeared increasingly weak under the Bruin test, a new legal standard that demands any gun regulation must be rooted in clear historical precedent. Legal scholars and commentators noted that the government struggled to provide convincing historical examples supporting such restrictions. The Supreme Court seized this opportunity to address a fundamental question. Does barrel length alone provide a valid reason for banning an entire class of firearms? Or does such a restriction overstep constitutional boundaries? The justices examined the history of firearm regulations and the practical differences between various barrel lengths. By combining these landmark cases, the court was able to confront the core constitutional issue directly, weighing the rights of individuals against the government's authority to regulate firearms. The legal community watched closely, aware that the outcome could set a powerful precedent. The stage was set for a historic and potentially transformative ruling on the extent of federal power under the Second Amendment, with implications that would reach far beyond Miller himself. The outcome of United States v. Miller would not only determine the fate of SBRs and stabilizing braces, but would also reshape the entire legal landscape for gun owners and lawmakers across the nation, setting the tone for future debates on gun rights in America. The unanimous decision was built on the common use standard from Heller. Miller's lawyers showed that SBRs are widely owned for legitimate purposes, making them neither dangerous nor unusual. The government failed to provide historical evidence for banning firearms based on barrel length. Attempts to compare SBRs to concealed weapons or trap guns fell flat. The Bruin framework boxed the government in without historical precedent. The ban couldn't stand. Liberal justices joined the majority, recognizing that consistency with precedent outweighed personal views. To rule otherwise would have undermined the court's credibility. The 9-0 ruling reinforced judicial restraint and doctrinal consistency. It was a victory for constitutional principle over politics. Chief Justice Roberts' majority opinion was clear and restrained. He reaffirmed that the Second Amendment protects arms in common use for lawful purposes. The government failed to show SBRs aren't in common use. Evidence showed widespread, responsible ownership. Public safety concerns, while important, can't justify banning an entire class of arms used lawfully. The opinion called the 16-inch barrel rule arbitrary, lacking historical or logical basis. Regulations based on minor features, Roberts wrote, cannot stand if they don't alter a firearm's fundamental nature. The court found no founding-era precedent for banning firearms by barrel length. The ruling left no doubt. The SBR prohibition was unconstitutional. The Miller II decision erases sharp legal lines between states on SBRs. In most states, the change is one of convenience. No more tax, paperwork, or registration. In states with outright bans, like California and New York, those laws are now void. Legislatures in these states must repeal or amend their laws, likely sparking new political battles. Any new restrictions will face legal challenges under the Bruin and Miller II precedents. Law enforcement must quickly adapt, shifting from categorical bans to focusing on individual conduct. The ruling forces a fundamental change in how states and police approach firearm regulation. For citizens, SBRs are now as easy to acquire as any other rifle, likely fueling a surge in sales and production. Existing owners are freed from federal registration, restoring privacy. Law enforcement no longer needs to navigate complex NFA rules, but loses a tool for easy felony charges. Critics warn of increased crime due to SBRs' compact size. Supporters argue criminals were never deterred by regulations. The real impact on crime will be closely watched and hotly debated. The decision normalizes SBRs, emboldening challenges to other NFA restrictions. The ATF may shift focus from technical classifications to targeting illegal trafficking and violent crime. The cultural landscape of gun ownership is forever changed. The Supreme Court's unanimous ruling in Miller II marks a watershed moment for American gun law, signaling a dramatic shift in the legal landscape. For decades, the Second Amendment has been at the center of heated national debate, but this decision stands out for its clarity and the unity of the court. As the sun rises over the Supreme Court, a new era begins for the right to bear arms in America. By striking down the SBR ban, the court not only reaffirmed, but also strengthened the Heller and Bruin frameworks, making them the definitive law of the land. This ruling sends a clear message that the court is committed to a robust interpretation of the Second Amendment, setting a powerful precedent for future cases. The decision removes a major pillar of the National Firearms Act and invalidates stricter state bans, creating a new national standard that all states must now follow. This sweeping change will force lawmakers across the country to revisit and revise their own regulations, ensuring they align with the Constitution as interpreted by the highest court. The ruling's unanimity gives it lasting institutional weight, making it far less likely to be overturned or ignored. When all 9 justices speak with one voice, their decision resonates through every level of government and society. This victory was achieved through overwhelming evidence and a meticulous focus on historical tradition, drawing on centuries of legal precedent and the original understanding of the Second Amendment. The court's reliance on history and tradition strengthens the legitimacy of its decision. The effects will be felt nationwide, as states are now compelled to align with the new constitutional baseline. From coast to coast, lawmakers, law enforcement, and citizens alike must adapt to this new reality, which will reshape the legal landscape for years to come. While this decision closes one chapter in the ongoing story of American gun rights, it also opens another. The court's opinion provides a detailed roadmap for future challenges to gun regulations, inviting new legal battles and debates over the limits of the Second Amendment. The next frontier is already taking shape. Which long-standing firearm law will fall next under this powerful interpretation of the Second Amendment? As the legal landscape continues to evolve, the nation watches closely, knowing that the story is far from over.